Welcome to the 1CA podcast. This is your host, Jack Gaines. 1CA is a product of the Civil Affairs Association and brings in people who are current or former military, diplomats, development officers, and field agents to discuss their experiences on ground with the partner nation's people and leadership. Our goal is to inspire anyone interested in working the last 3 feet of foreign relations. To contact the show, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com or look us up on the Civil Affairs Association website at www.civilaffairsassoc.org. I'll have those in the show notes.
Hey, this is John. You're doing a great job with the show. We appreciate everything you've been putting out to the community. I've got a couple of requests. So some older episodes that I'd love for you to run back again if you've got time. One is the Digital Civil Recon. Steve Hunnewell and Dr. Carrick Longley talking about how that applies to forces today.
That, of course, is John McElligott calling in to recommend some episodes that deserve a second listen. As you know, I use 1 week out of the month to bring in guest shows, but I think John has a great idea to also introduce shows from the archives that complement today's topics. So let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to the 1CA podcast. My name is John McElligott, your host for today's episode, and we're gathered by 2 guests from IST Research, Dr. Carrick Longley and Steve Hunnewell. Carrick serves as the Senior Vice President and leads the technical and innovation efforts at IST Research. Steve Hunnewell serves as the Senior Director, where he focuses on the innovation efforts supporting IST's population engagement competency. Dr. Carrick Longley and Steve Hunnewell, thank you very much for being on the 1CA podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys, and I want to start this by saying that the Civil Affairs Association that sponsors, that underwrites basically the 1CA podcast, is growing its connections to private industry and wants the CA operators to know more about what's happening in industry, what kind of tools are out there that are available. And we'd eventually like to grow to the point where more operators are also telling you what their issues are in the field so that you can come up with even better solutions for the CA community, both for the Army and the Marine Corps. So you guys have that background, Carrick coming from the Marine Corps and Steve coming from the Army. You guys get civil affairs, you've been there, you've worked in those units and worked alongside them. And I think that's a huge value added to IST Research. And I wanted to start this conversation by framing for listeners what IST Research is all about. So for either of you, if you could please tell listeners more about IST and what services do you provide and where are they?
Sure, I think I can start, and Steve could probably add where I left off. So IST Research is, we are a small, better known small business based out of Fredericksburg, Virginia. Right now we actually have about 80 employees. We've almost doubled in size in the past year. And we primarily are a software development and services company. The majority of our work is in the federal space, although we do support Department of State and some non-governmental organizations for some research on human trafficking outside of our federal work. But we're probably best known as the company that develops the Pulse platform. So Pulse is a social listening and population engagement system that we've been developing for about 5 years now, and it's got its roots in a couple of different SBIRs and DARPA programs. And out of that has come the system that is now probably quite widely used across SOCOM and across other organizations for doing large-scale social listening and population engagement.
So for people who are not as familiar with social listening, is that talking about sucking up social media and open source information to find out sentiment of a population for and against certain themes?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So our social listening platform does large-scale publicly available information gathering from the open, deep, and dark web from a multitude of social media platforms and has global reach. It is predominantly used to get a better understanding of what populations are concerned with, trending topics, sentiment, and a variety of other indicators from what is posted online. That social listening data is good on its own, but we think where it becomes much more powerful is when you actually couple that with population engagement. In other words, it's one thing to see what the Afghan online information environment looks like, It's a wholly different thing to take that, inform your engagement, and actually go out and talk to Afghans. So social listening at the most simple is just that. It is large scale PAI monitoring and collection to get a better understanding about a given topic in a geography or in some other locale.
How trusted are certain sources of data that you have coming in, that they accurately reflect, the sample size that you can extrapolate, generally say, yeah, this is a representative of the population?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to sort of unpack that question. I think first and foremost, I think there's a fantastic tool that or report that's put out every year by a company called We Are Social. They collaborate with Hootsuite. But for every country in the world, they publish a report that they update annually that really goes into mobile phone penetration, smartphone usage, social media usage by country, by locale. And the sort of key thing that keeps coming up over and over again is, despite how rural some locations may be, the connectivity is improving every day, every month, every year. And we've actually we use that in many cases to help us inform our approach to doing polling, to doing survey work, to doing engagement. And as you mentioned, there are always caveats to instrumentation that you use. There are always different sampling frames that you need to take into consideration, and things that can be generalized, other things that cannot be generalized. Everything from probability to non-probability based sampling, selection bias, so on and so forth. However, I will say that over the last 4 years, I ran most of our information campaigns overseas, and despite being in active conflict zones, despite being in areas with severe disruptions to the internet, despite the outbreak of disease, there is always a way to reach a population, whether that's using traditional radios, flyers, basic SMS in Central Africa, to really robust interactive online surveys that you recruit, deliver, and provide remuneration for individuals who take surveys completely online without any physical footprint anywhere. So we span the gamut of all of those, and the tech that we build helps us unlock getting access to people in very hard to reach places around the world.
That's really cool to hear. And you guys are at the forefront of working on this stuff. So for example, your team is working on some innovative ways to conduct more traditional, I guess, civil reconnaissance, but digital civil recon and population engagement you're talking about. And a lot of listeners from the CA community are familiar with the traditional conduct of civil recon on the ground, talking to people, conducting face-to-face key leader engagements or leader engagements. So what is digital civil recon?
So digital civil reconnaissance, as you alluded to, John, much of the audience is very much familiar with JP 3-57 that defines civil reconnaissance as a targeted, planned, and coordinated observation and evaluation of specific civil aspects of the environment. While digital civil reconnaissance is a method of capitalizing on either the existing open source information or publicly available information without a physical presence in that area, and or utilizing the capabilities that we've run through to act as that social stimulant to remotely engage those populations. As Carrick was mentioning and walking us through, one of our competencies is engaging populations via the mediums that they choose to consume information. So that digital civil reconnaissance allows us to conduct that observation and evaluation of those specific civil aspects while remaining offset via the platforms and mediums that those audiences are currently consuming, not having them go to another mean or method to provide that information.
So you've been there as a CA guy, from the CA operator's perspective, to figure out which platforms the local population is using, and then to shift the way that they're conducting civil recon. They're going to plan their next digital civil recon mission. Does that take an initial week or two to just gather information from the ground, or can you do that remotely as well to figure out well, what platforms are they using before they come up with a plan for more rigorous, I guess, digital civil recon?
So the great thing about this is that it can be done prior to a physical civil reconnaissance. It can be conducted along with, after, or in place of that traditional civil reconnaissance. In informing the civil reconnaissance and shaping it, and also, again, acting as that social stimulant where you can engage prior to the movement itself to shape the dialogue and the discussion, but also to inform your own discussion going out there. So, for example, if you're a team leader and you're going out, and we'll draw from, say, an Afghan example within that context, you can engage with that village prior to even going out there and understand what their needs are. This would then better shape your questions during the civil reconnaissance itself. And then you could follow up that engagement and keep it persistent in terms of, following up with either the elders, the government officials, really those key actors and influencers that you had previously targeted. So not only are you conducting that face-to-face, but you're augmenting it and amplifying it with the ability to maintain a persistent conversation that you can then build upon.
My friends and I text each other. We use WhatsApp, the family, people are on Facebook. So there are a lot of ways that friends and family stay connected online, but there's a huge value to seeing someone at a holiday or at a Christmas party or a birthday party or your kids, whatever is going on. Do you see the greatest value in putting the two together? Or how do you stack them in terms of digital recon and like a percentage of your time and effort in civil affairs as an operator? How much digital recon should you be doing compared to the in-person stuff? And how do you sort of weight the values of remote or digital civil recon compared to, press in the flesh and finding out who's who in the zoo by seeing them and taking photos?
So I think the question really is one of scale. There's in no way do I think remote engagement, remote reconnaissance, digital reconnaissance will completely obviate the need to do in-person work. That will always be a requirement. However, there's ample evidence, and we've got a lot of experience doing large-scale digital reconnaissance where you simply cannot achieve that scale with people. And so, if I had to look at this if I had to give you some made-up percentage, I would say probably it'd be something like 80-20. 80% of your time, I'll stick with the Pareto principle here, 80% of your time is going to be spent, or should be spent, I think, doing digital reconnaissance, and 20% doing the in-person. And it's probably even less. Because, in general, we've seen that if you look at, broad information requirements, in general, many of them can be answered without physically stepping foot somewhere. Or you can take advantage of the fact that there are people that are already located in some area. You just need to find them, recruit them, and incentivize them to gather the information you're looking for. And so as an example of where we've done some of this hybrid, we've had, in Central Africa, we had pretty good radio coverage to be able to reach out and touch a large audience. We ran infomercials, people then texted into our system, and we were able to continue on this conversation. But in some villages, it actually did require a physical presence. They did not have any form of connectivity whatsoever. We knew that there was some activity of interest that we really needed to get a better understanding for what the situation on the ground looked like. And that's where we then leveraged in-person reconnaissance, physical reconnaissance to go and take a look at what was happening in these villages. But that was a very small percentage of the overall effort. The majority of it was doing digital reconnaissance. You mentioned, we've got all these different channels to communicate with people, and we're very sensitive to the fact that, one size doesn't fit all. SMS is still the universal mechanism to communicate. It's sort of the lowest common denominator. But depending on where you are geographically, WhatsApp is the dominant platform of choice, or it's the only real platform of choice. Facebook Messenger, Viber, Line, so on and so forth. And so we've designed and built our platform around that concept of, it does not matter which channel you prefer, we can reach you on any of those channels. And I think the other piece that really starts to bring in is that over the last 6 months, we've really taken a concerted effort in leveraging digital advertising platforms and all the value that can provide to digital reconnaissance. To give you an understanding of not only what applications people are using, how people are communicating, but where they physically located, being able to do pattern of life activity, things that otherwise would not have normally been available are now available to us. So it really can augment what you're trying to do. But at the end of the day, I think it's a question of scale. You simply cannot scale civil reconnaissance with enough manpower. You cannot be everywhere all the times. And so I think that's where digital reconnaissance really comes in to help augment the in-person, face-to-face work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, that's a great point. And CA teams are small too. We don't have a lot of people.
And it's exactly to that point as Carrick was saying. It's about identifying the range of relevant actors and their associated networks. So when you have one SIMC out there doing that, they can then streamline their operations to make them that much more efficient and really just see tremendous rewards from those limited engagements that they can do, particularly now as we're seeing the increased offset driven by COVID-19 restrictions in various locales.
Yeah, quite a timing to have tested out to a larger scale all these different remote tools. So to that point, let me talk about this final question for the first half of our discussion, then we'll take a break. So in an article that was published on Medium, your CEO, Ryan Patterson, described the challenge of conducting monitoring evaluation during a pandemic or whenever these traditional on-site methods can't happen. So he does go on to share some solutions. He wrote, quote, "Technologies have existed for decades that provide M&E services that are remote, scalable, cost-efficient, sensitive to the realities of vulnerable populations, and more accurate than standard methods," end quote. Gentlemen, what are some of these solutions that Ryan was talking about?
Yeah, I can address some of those. So Ryan and I have collaborated a lot, specifically on remote monitoring and engagement. And this has come out of some work that we've done for World Bank, both as a prime and as a sub for a couple of others. But so COVID is just the most recent context, but let me take a step back and talk about remote monitoring and evaluation. So the traditional method of doing development work monitoring and evaluation includes normally getting a bunch of expatriates, putting them in country somewhere, surrounding them with a very heavy security detachment and detail, going out and physically conducting a site survey, and a lot of this is infrastructure. So it's buildings, bridges, wells, canals, schools, you name it. And going out and conducting a very basic site survey, take pictures of all the buildings, check out the material that's being used, making sure it's not in a floodplain, ensuring that the material is up to standard, so on and so forth. And then they usually have a structural engineer in the case of a building, a bridge or something, taking a look at it, say, yes, it meets spec, it doesn't meet spec. That whole process, by the time you add in all of the expatriates, by the time you add in all the subject matter experts, by the time you add in your security detail, ends up costing somewhere on the order of $3,000 to $5,000 per site visit. So for that one single report, if you average it out and say this is what it looks like, that's how much it costs. At the same time, we have said, what would it look like rather than doing all of that work where we fly a bunch of people out of the US, put them in some compound, run security convoys, et cetera, with them? What if instead we actually take advantage of advertising tools and we try to recruit somebody who lives near that site? Now, they don't need to be a structural engineer, but all they need to be is somebody that has access to a smartphone and that can read and write. And by the nature of the fact that we're running, as an example, a targeted ad in some village, and that targeted ad is being run on us and through in-app banner ads on smartphones, I know right off the bat that one, they can read, two, they have a smartphone. So it's already met two of the requirements that I need for somebody to actually go and do work. And then the next piece is, well, now that they've seen my ad, they clicked on it and said, look, I'm going to pay you money. By the way, all of which can be done completely remotely. We can transfer money in any sort of form through a variety of mechanisms. And now I have somebody who lives near that hypothetical bridge, and I say, I want you to go out and take pictures. Take pictures, walk along this path, fill out a few pieces of information, and hit send. And we've actually done this specifically in Afghanistan in 3 different locations. That one was heavily urbanized, one was very remote, one was sort of in between. And we went through a series of recruitment steps where, from advertisement to initial onboarding to some initial tasking and validation of those tasks to the actual, okay, go do a site survey. And that whole process, when it comes down to sort of the total cost of the bill payer, was orders of magnitude lower. It was like $200 as opposed to several $1,000s. And it's because you can do things at scale. I can recruit at scale. I can visit. The periodicity with which I can hit a site is much, much faster because I don't have this massive security entourage. I don't have this massive expat footprint. And if I still needed to get that report to a structural engineer, that report is digital. It gets sent over to a structural engineer who's sitting in, the NCR somewhere, as an example, reviews the information, maybe has some follow-up questions go back out. So this is the equivalent of TaskRabbit, but it's TaskRabbit for overseas with a very local context, and does not require somebody to download a specific app to do that work. Now, there are others that do very similar. Some of our competitors in this space have their own app. They do sort of micro-tasking and recruitment. And for digital reconnaissance, that method works really well. We don't subscribe to the idea of having to build a specific app, because if you're an Afghan, you're probably on Viber or you're on Telegram. You may be on Facebook Messenger, likely it's pretty low, but Viber without a doubt. If you're in Ecuador, I know you're on WhatsApp because the entire country is on WhatsApp. Almost nobody even has SMS platforms. So we go this sort of choose your own adventure for how you communicate with an audience. But that's what Ryan was talking about. He and I have really talked about how that industry is ripe for disruption. We're monitoring and engagement, and even more so now, where the traditional method of that very expensive security apparatus and expat and all that continues to be the standard because everyone's very comfortable with it. And we've not been, full disclosure, perfectly, we've not been as disruptive as we would like to see in this area, because there's a lot of resistance to change. And I suspect that even through some of the listeners of this audience might be very highly skeptical of digital reconnaissance using the methods I'm talking about. But when it's all said and done, there's a lot of value, not just in cost savings, but in speed to action, increased periodicity, quality of the reporting, et cetera, that can be addressed or controlled for. When the questions inevitably come about, well, how do I trust this piece of information? Because it's so inexpensive, I can task 3 or 4 people to collect the exact same information without them knowing that they're all collecting the same information, and I can do triangulation. So there's all kinds of little techniques and tricks we've come up with to address some of the questions. But the point being is that the ability to do this quickly at scale and doing these remote M&E, all of the pieces have been in place for actually a number of years. COVID is just the latest example of not only does it complicate the traditional method, but it really makes the traditional approach untenable and unfeasible. You're simply not going to find people who are willing and interested to go do face-to-face reconnaissance with a global pandemic in place. So the barriers to entry for us to test out and try digital reconnaissance, I think, have been greatly lowered as a result of COVID.
And then a secondary benefit from this, as Carrick pointed out, the extreme cost here. You're looking at an unnatural capital infusion into already fragile markets. And as we've all experienced working in some of these conflict zones and these emerging markets and fragile states, any introduction like that of additional capital in addition to people just furthers the illicit economy and furthers and draws out the underlying issues driving the conflict.
Yeah, and that you gentlemen bring up some great points, and I know USAID, which funds a lot of monitoring and evaluation for development for the U.S. government, is trying to build local partnerships. It talked for many, many years about trying to put themselves out of business, but they're very strong interests in the development world, and it'll be interesting to see how some innovative techniques like this will hopefully drive more local partners to be able to execute, partnering with the U.S. Gentlemen, let's talk about the connection to CA forces. Carrick, you worked in Marine Corps Information Operations, and Steve, you were CA Infantry. What are you hearing from the civil affairs NCOs and officers about their needs on the ground to conduct innovative civil recon, to conduct digital civil recon, and population engagement?
So, with respect to what we're currently hearing from the CA community right now, I mean, obviously the first one is COVID-19 and the need to conduct these offset engagements. So if you're a SIMC operating in a certain country, it could be rather restrictive just based off of where you are in terms of your ability to move, but you still have a mission. So this capability allows you to not only continue to conduct that civil reconnaissance, that population engagement, but then bring it up another level, as Carrick has laid out in terms of scale. The need to gather data in specific regions over a short period of time. Here we have it where we're in an environment in that we're trying to move at the speed of information. And I mean, that is instantaneous. Again, trying to gather that data across regions that you cannot physically access, either due to COVID-19 or conflict, or just an inability to be in two places at once. And then having that data and informing commanders, helping them to analyze, to then drive their decision making regarding civil military operations in an area. And then following either a civil military operation or a military information support operation, or public diplomacy, measuring the effectiveness of those activities conducted. How are people perceiving, processing the activity and or the information that was provided? And then as we enter this new continuum of conflict, the need to quickly identify and address vulnerabilities that weaken a specific population, and then how are our adversaries exploiting those vulnerabilities? Where can we counteract those? All of the outlines, that's what we're hearing from the community at this time. And then how do we help them enhance those? But then how do we help them identify future challenges that are being presented as we move as a force to this new continuum, this new gray zone, if you will?
Thanks, Steve. And I'm wondering if the forces who are sharing information with you, are they more concerned with digital civil recon, for example, and innovative ways to conduct population engagement? Are they coming from EUCOM, Indo-PACOM, like more concerned with countries around Russia and China, or are they coming from AFRICOM, where they may have more remote populations in some countries, hard to reach, and that's what's driving the need or their desire to have innovative tools for digital civil recon, for example?
So with respect to geography, it's geographically agnostic. This is understanding that our peers in this, they are not tied and not bound by geographic combatant commands. These elements operate from Africa to Latin America to Europe and Asia. With respect to who is asking what, that is truly determined by the position. Focusing on our social listening capability in our content discovery competency, we are hearing receiving much of those inputs from the human network analysis cell, and the OIC of that cell, or the NCOs who constitute that cell. With respect to actually engaging, conducting population engagement, those are truly coming from the team leaders, the XOs, the S3s, so the team leaders in terms of the SIMCs, or just a CAT team itself, as well as the S3s. And that truly goes into how can I use this to assess the efficacy of a program or an action? How can I use it to help drive my decision making regarding X effort?
And Carrick, you're an IO guy from the Marine Corps. On the Army side, where I am, we have a reserve command that combines CA, PSYOP, and IO under UC What's IST research hearing from the reserve side, and are these tools that would apply to CA, PSYOP, and IO?
Yeah, they are. So the Marine Corps is, full disclosure, and I say this with a heavy heart. We don't necessarily have our crap together in this space as much as we would like to. There has been a concerted effort over the last several years to develop these MEF information groups, and within that information group, you actually have civil affairs, military information support operators, military deception planners, so on and so forth. So all of the different, what we would traditionally call IRCs, or what used to be called IRCs, I don't know what the flavor of today is, but all of them, all the capabilities together under one roof. There has been, and we have actually seen and supported on both the technology and services side to sort of a wide range of individuals using it. So our product, from both the social listening and the engagement, has supported digital reconnaissance for civil affairs teams. It has supported target audience assessment and analysis for the PSYOP Marines, and it supported other activities for other related capabilities. On the reserve side, it's not as well structured because the Marine Reserves is just much smaller, relative to the Army Reserves and the Guard. There are most of the IO and CA. There are reserve CA units, and they certainly have expressed interest in the platform and the tools. But I think most of the active use of our systems and these concepts are coming out of these information groups.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carrick. Gentlemen, two other questions I wanted to cover before we close this conversation today. And the first is talking about how CA forces have been selected in part for their abilities to interact with local populations. They help to gain trust. They influence people to meet the commander's end state. So how would using more technology change the way that CA forces interact with indigenous populations and institutions?
Quite simply, is that it just provides another medium by which they're able to engage and further that conversation to make it enduring, one that is not location or time bound. Previously, interactions were limited to when you had the physical means to engage or get your movement approved. So this allows you to build on those face-to-face interactions, as we've discussed, and have that persistent engagement, one that where you can continue to build that confidence, continue to build that safe and secure dialogue with those key influencers and those key actors within a populations network.
Steve, I was going to add on to that. You said it a lot more eloquently than I did, Steve. I was going to say, that we built a really, really nice hammer. That does not mean that you can go out and build a house if you're not a carpenter. So the basic skills still need to be in place. I own a hammer. I can't build anything with it. So I think that's so the point is simply that the platform allows you to expand your reach. It allows you to engage with audiences. But if you don't know how to engage with an individual to begin with, this isn't going to make you all of a sudden really good at engaging with populations. You still have to consider local context, the language divide, the socioeconomic status, and how that influences someone's behaviors. You still have to take into consideration that whole package. This is just a much better way to scale that conversation than what you had before. But it doesn't mean you're a great orator just because you can now reach lots and lots of people.
Yeah, good point. Gentlemen, do you think it takes a culture shift? I've had bosses who feel like they don't trust that I'm doing the work unless they can see me in the office. Are we in a generation or getting there where the supervisor, your rater, senior rater, will trust that you're doing equally good work online and through digital civil recon?
I would say that current events have forced us to appreciate the reality is that, yes, that is true. not being physically present, you can still garner the same rewards as being physically present, and in some cases more so. And having those face-to-face conversations, and this is all drawn from training and experience. You understand that your mere presence and who you are will shape those outcomes, will shape those answers in a way that having this digital communication may not. It may actually elicit some truthful responses, or ones that are not shaped by the inherent dynamics that a face-to-face interaction would have. But to the original point, yes, I would say that we are seeing an acceptance here of not having that face-to-face.
So, gentlemen, one final question for you today. You guys are a player in this digital revolution of data collection tools and sifting through big data, massive data, to drive better development, to drive better engagement between military forces and other government agencies and local populations around the world. What are your recommendations for ways that civil affairs troops should prepare for tomorrow? For example, are there self-guided or unit-led training that will prepare them to understand and use the tools you're building, to understand how to use this hammer? And what books and articles can they read to understand the terminology and methods?
So I think more and more you're seeing digital natives, especially coming up through the ranks. People that the internet has always existed in their lifetime. It has never not existed. I think more of the sea changes in the senior leadership ranks, to be totally honest, where the internet didn't exist when I was first a young kid, and it was a thing that I still remember America Online and CompuServe and the dial-up modem sounds from a 2400 baud modem. But the digital natives now, I think it's taking the idea that the internet is everywhere, and if you're comfortable operating in the digital environment in the U.S., there's no reason why you can't extend that same concept and apply it for your craft. And as I mentioned earlier on, I think in our podcast, more and more, even in war-torn areas, even in impoverished countries, the internet penetration rates, mobile phone consumption and usage rates, they're ever increasing. So more and more of the world's population is becoming more and more connected. So if you are comfortable, if you're either a digital native or you're not a native, but are certainly comfortable operating that environment, the more you can take the ideas of being able to reach out and communicate, the more you interact with those online, the more you understand the different communications channels that are available to you, the different techniques and methods of being able to reach out and touch someone. I think that makes you, bringing those ideas along will make you more successful in the end.
Steve?
So just recommendations, self-guided, unit-led training. I don't have any there because I believe, CA, it's something that sets us apart from the other soft tribes, in that we're more beholden to education, just by the nature of what we do and how we do it. So my recommendation would actually be a book, The Kill Chain, and it helps to shape by Christian Brose, and it just helps to frame and shape the current environment that we are in, and how you can best position CA and its competencies to support that. And then just an article that really gets down into more of the operational and tactical, how things are changing and can be used to possibly guide how operators would shape some of this engagement, whether it's digital civil reconnaissance or social listening, is entitled "Belarus Has Torn Up the Protest Rulebook. Everyone Should Listen." It's Wired UK by Sean Williams. And again, it's just another great resource to really get you thinking of how you would utilize these capabilities.
Gentlemen, this has been a great discussion again. Thank you for being on the 1CA podcast. I want to thank Dr. Carrick Longley and Stephen Hunnewell from IST Research. Gentlemen, you guys are welcome back anytime. In the show notes, we'll drop links to IST and the book and the article that you've mentioned. So if there's anything else that you have to share with the CA audience, please come through the CA Association, and please let us know as you develop more products and there's stuff to push out to the CA community. We welcome you back to share that on the podcast as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. Also, if you're interested in coming on the show or hosting an episode, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com. I'll have the email and CA Association website in the show notes. And now, most importantly, to those currently out in the field, working with a partner nation's people or leadership to forward U.S. relations, thank you all for what you're doing. This is Jack, your host. Stay tuned for more great episodes. One CA Podcast.